Good evening. This week's look at women in the Revolutionary War is especially interesting. Um, I think that most times we often don't put a lot of emphasis on the women of the Revolutionary War because there's such emphasis on the founding fathers, the men that were in charge of leading the country during that time. However, I revert back to the old adage that behind every great man is a great woman, or another great one. That a man may be the captain of his ship, but the woman is the admiral. And both of those kind of serve to show that while they were unequal in political and legal realms, their voices and their thoughts and their ideas were still necessary and helped form a nation, just on a different spectrum. One such person was Abigail Adams. Abigail Adams was the wife of the second president of the United States, John Adams, who was very outspoken and definitely a spirited man. Timid is not a word that you would use to describe him. And of course, she was the mother of the sixth president of the United States, John Quincy, which I think is very interesting. I've always found it very interesting, those women who have been on both sides, both wife and mother of presidents. She grew up in an elite Puritan family in New England. Her own upbringing would not afford her an education, however. This was mainly due to sickness, she says in several correspondences. Matter of fact, sickness becomes a theme of hers. I can't go do this, or I cannot come join you here because of my health, which is very interesting down through the years. It even led to her living separately from her husband while he attended to matters and affairs of running the country as vice president and president. Occasionally, during this estrangement, according to Linda Garbe, Abigail would address her letters under the pseudonym Portia. And of course, Portia was Brutus's wife's name in historic Rome, and Portia was also not allowed in the Roman city, and so we see this kind of this throwback, this homage to Roman history. Her thoughts and attitudes on political ideas, however, were a common theme in her writings to her husband. She was an advocate for women's rights, and more specifically, she was an advocate for women's rights for education. She wrote to her husband many times on the matter. And it's interesting to note that she was never outspoken in public about such matters. They stayed in a private form, in a private correspondence and letters with friends and with her husband. However, one of her most famous letters comes during the Second Continental Congress, and it's entitled "Remember the Ladies." And in this letter, she implores her husband to think on the new code of laws which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make. I desire for you to remember the ladies, and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. She also warns him later on in that same letter, do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. Those are some pretty strong words from a woman of that time. Social order and social class did not afford women to be as frank as Abigail Adams seems to be in her letters with her husband. It definitely shows an interesting relationship between the two. Abigail's revolutionary spirit is seen in her writings down through the time of correspondence with her husband, as well as her deeds during the time. While she supported her husband and spoke of equality of women in education and society as only a personal thing, her own personal life was not a reflection of that. The way in which she lived her life was not a part of that dream. Due to the social roles of the day, her marriage to John Adams was not a union of equals. However, she continued to write about such matters towards that idea. Upon her death, it is said that she wrote her will to include her granddaughters as the beneficiaries of most of her property, which was extremely uncommon in that time, since women had no political or legal status as far as ownership of property went. Her defiance in this is an excellent picture of what made Abigail Adams a revolutionary wife and an outspoken figure in the Revolutionary War.